Last time we wrapped up the Cell Saga, but Trunks, Gohan and Videl decided to spend a few more weeks in the past. Videl wanted to learn how to grow senzu beans from Korin. Meanwhile, Gohan was spending a little time with his past self and his mother. He didn't want to leave her alone so soon after losing Goku. He'd already made that mistake in his timeline. He'd more or less disappeared. Trunks was pretty much just spending time with his family. His father seemed down after everything that happened with Cell, but he was sure his pride was just wounded. He'd bounce back. Videl would approach Korin about learning to grow the beans, and initially he didn't think it was worth trying.
Growing senzu beans isn't easy. I tried to teach Yajirobe once, but he gave up pretty quick.
Korin warned her as he picked a few beans off the plant. Well, he had you here to do it for him. If I can't learn it, there's no one in my time who can. In short, she just had more motivation than Yajirobe to learn it.
Alright, I'll try to teach you. Just don't get frustrated if you can't hack it. The process of growing senzu beans is slow, difficult, and even if you do get it right, each plant only yields a handful of beans.
Videl had expected it to be difficult, but this was insane. She didn't have any gardening experience as is, but these plants were so finicky. They'd die extremely quickly if they were too hot or too cold. They'd die if there was too much sunlight. They'd die if you overwatered them, even slightly. They could only grow in specific soil conditions which could only be found around Korin's tower. They took an eternity to grow, and if you didn't pick the beans at peak ripeness, you had to start again because they lost their healing abilities if they weren't picked straight away. This is all stuff I'm making up, by the way, but if Korin is the only person who can grow senzu beans, I figure it has to be pretty complex. Anyway, as Videl was pulling her hair out trying to grow beans, Gohan was, well, talking to Gohan, the younger him, asking how he was feeling after the Cell games. You lost your dad, right? How long did it take you to get over it? Future Gohan hadn't been expecting that question, but perhaps he should have been.
I wouldn't say I did. I just had other things to distract me. I didn't have time to be upset. I had to fight the androids. That's not to say I didn't care. I miss him every day. But I knew my dad wouldn't want me to sit around and mourn him while others were suffering. That advice wasn't exactly helpful, but the younger him accepted the answer nonetheless. If anything, he felt a little bad about asking it, just assuming his older self was fine. What do I do now? The world is at peace, but my dad is gone. Does that leave me in charge of keeping the world safe? He didn't sound super happy about that one. He wanted to keep everyone safe, of course, but did that mean he had to put his own life on hold? I'm not sure. I've thought about the same thing. Once I'm back in my own time and I've dealt with the androids, I'm not sure what I'm gonna do. For you though, you've got Vegeta, Piccolo, Krillin, and the others. You shouldn't get complacent, but defending the Earth isn't just on you, so you can take some time for yourself. I think that ship has sailed for me, but you can still become a great scholar.
In truth, future Gohan wasn't sure how he'd adjust to peace. He'd been fighting the androids for so long he wasn't sure what he'd do afterwards. The first thing he'd do was go see his mother, as well as introduce her to Videl, but after that he wasn't sure. He didn't have any long-term plans. I think you'll be fine. You've got Videl and Trunks to watch after you, whatever you decide to do when you get back. Good luck.
Same to you.
At Capsule Corp, they'd received an unexpected visitor, Hercule. Now, he didn't pretend to understand what had happened at the Cell games, but if that person was his daughter from the future, he wanted to find her again. He didn't have any leads, of course, but he had seen the Capsule Corp logo on that big robot guy who'd been at the Cell games, so this was his best shot at finding her. After some convincing, Dr. Briefs decided to bring him to Trunks, who had been assisting his mother in looking after his younger self. He was a little surprised to see Hercule, but still agreed to take him to see Videl, carrying Hercule to Korin's tower, where they'd find Videl tending to a plant. She had sensed Trunks' energy and greeted him without turning around. Oh hey Trunks, Korin says this one has a pretty good shot at surviving. I think I'm starting to get this. She had turned to face Trunks and come face to face with her father. She wasn't immediately sure what to say. Hi, Dad, Videl greeted somewhat awkwardly.
We didn't really get a chance to talk before, but if you're my Videl from the future, I want to spend a little time with you.
Trunks felt as if he may be intruding, so he'd back up. Heading to the bottom of the tower, he'd come back once it was time for them to go.
You never said, what am I like in the future?
From how hesitant she'd been to answer, he was honestly a little worried. Videl wasn't sure how to answer, but she didn't feel like she should lie to him about it. I'm sorry, but you aren't around anymore. Hercule was immediately shocked by the news. This Videl couldn't be much older than 20, 23 at the most, and he wasn't around anymore?
What happened?
In the world I'm from, most of humanity has been destroyed by a pair of powerful androids. You died protecting me from them. You gave your life so I could get away. So it wasn't natural causes. He didn't have to worry about it. He for a moment doubted he could be that brave, but as he thought of his Videl, he was certain it was the truth.
So then, did you come back to stop them before they showed up? Did that have something to do with Cell?
They did, but actually the androids who destroyed the world in the future are decent people in the present. It's pretty confusing, but me, Gohan, and Trunks should be able to beat the androids when we go back to the future.
Gohan and Trunks, are they the two guys you were with at the Cell games?
Yep, Trunks is the one who brought you here, and I think Gohan is spending some time with his mother. So, what exactly are those two to you? He didn't mean to pry, but he was curious. Trunks is just a friend, and Gohan is, well, I don't know yet. We both like each other, but we'd agreed not to act on it until the androids are dealt with.
But I thought they were already dealt with.
Well, dealing with them here doesn't change the future, it just creates a timeline where they don't destroy the world. When we get back, we'll have another fight in our hands. She'd clench her fist, but we're prepared for it now.
Well, what are you doing now?
Well, he'd seen, of course, but he didn't get it. Still, maybe gardening was just how she'd relaxed. He'd heard some people do that. Trying to learn how to grow senzu beans. They can heal any injury, but they're super difficult to grow. We don't have any left in the future, so I figured I could bring some from the past. A magic bean. Well, he'd seen stranger things and had no reason to doubt her. Hercule would spend the next few hours with Videl, and when he had to go, he'd pull her into a hug before he left. She'd tell him the day they were leaving, so he could come wave her off, and then she'd get back to what she was doing. Or, she tried anyway. She felt a single tear roll down her cheek. She hadn't even realized how much she'd missed him. Once Korin was sure she'd got it, he'd give her a bag of about 15 senzu beans to grow in the future, as well as a large book handwritten by him, containing everything he knew about growing them. And with that, he'd wave her off. He trusted she'd be able to get it right.
If you can't get it right, then I don't think anyone can.
Gohan, Videl, and Trunks would meet up at Capsule Corp, waving off their friends and families and heading back to the future. When they got there, they'd first meet up with Bulma and explain what happened in the past, before heading off to find the androids. Oh, it's you three. When you stopped showing up, we kinda figured you were dead. We're fine, stronger than ever in fact, and it's over for you two. Videl would step forward, challenging 17. You two can just watch. I'm gonna handle this one on my own. Gohan and Trunks would comply. Neither of them doubted for a second that she could handle it. 17 seemed surprised that she was challenging him by herself, but he didn't care. He'd rush forward, firing 3 energy beams towards Videl. She'd roll out the way of the first 2 before ducking under the last blast. 17 was shocked to see how well she was doing. Videl was supposed to be the weakest of the group. He'd attempt a few more blasts, but Videl simply weaved out the way. He'd throw a punch, but she'd catch the attack before firing a blast at his chest, sending him stumbling back, creating an opening for her to rush forward, kicking him to the ground. He'd jump back to his feet, now he was really losing his temper. There was no way he could be struggling like this against an ordinary human. He'd look over to Gohan and Trunks. If Videl could do this, well then these two must be even stronger. You're certainly putting up more of a fight than your father did. He'd attempt to mock her to get under her skin, but if it bothered her, she didn't show it. She'd fire a volley of energy blasts towards 17, who just about managed to evade them before leaping upwards attempting to punch her. But just as he got close, she'd fire the Thundershock Flash, electrocuting him and causing him to fall to the ground. You okay, bro? I'm not really keeping track, but I don't think you've hit her once. Want me to jump in? I'm fine. She's improved, but there's no way I'm gonna lose to a human. 17 jumped back to his feet before firing a ball of energy towards Videl. She destroyed it in midair, but through the smoke, 17 fired her another attack, which caught her in the shoulder. This was the first strike he managed to land, and admittedly it did hurt, but not enough to keep Videl off him for long. He'd go to kick her, but she caught his foot, throwing him to the ground. He landed hard on his shoulder, damn near dislocating it. She was ready to follow it up with a full power Kamehameha, but before she could fire, 18 would kick her across the face. This, of course, means Gohan and Trunks get involved. The androids would swiftly find themselves unable to keep up with them. Videl would knock 18 to the ground, swiftly followed by 17 after a hit from Trunks. Gohan would then destroy both machines with a one-handed Kamehameha. The three of them would take a day or two to rest after the defeat of the androids, and about a week later they'd decide to investigate Jiro's lab, where they would find a mostly developed version of Cell. Not quite ready yet, perhaps a year off of hatching. They'd also find a pod covered in dust labeled 16. The pods for 13, 14, and 15 were present, but they were empty. From the parts scattered around, it looked as if Jiro had decided to disassemble them at some point. 16 was the only one intact. They'd destroy the pod containing Cell before taking the deactivated Android 16 to Capsule Corp in order to be reprogrammed by Bulma. They could always use more allies. After that, Gohan would go to see Chi-Chi. He hadn't seen his mother in years, and he wasn't really sure what to say. He and Videl approached his old home in the mountains before knocking on the door. The Ox King was too stunned to even speak when he saw who it was. Hi, Grandpa. Chi-Chi was conflicted. Once she'd gotten over the fact that he was covered in scars and missing an arm, she was overjoyed that, aside from that, he seemed okay, and that he'd beaten the androids, but she was still also mad at him about not talking to her for all this time. Gohan would introduce Videl somewhat awkwardly, explaining who she was and that he'd be dead without her, but he decided not to bring up anything else for now. And what's your relationship with her? Videl, was it? Chi-Chi already had an idea from how he sounded when he talked about her. Well, I love her. His mother had an unreadable expression for a moment, before she smiled. At least he was honest about that. Alright, well, Videl, you better take good care of him. Someone has to. Yes, Mom. With both androids and Cell defeated, the world returned to relative peace. Bulma had 16 up and running again fairly quickly, and she'd even upgraded him somewhat. He was comparable to Gohan and Trunks as Super Saiyans. Videl, Gohan, and Trunks would keep training. Videl was determined to at least keep up with them in their base forms. As for her and Gohan, they eventually did get together, and they were married about a year after the defeat of the androids. And roughly a year after that, they would have Pan. Videl had to take a bit of a break from training since she was pregnant, but she still kept in shape. Gohan was just glad his daughter wouldn't have to be raised in a world where she'd constantly be on the run from the androids. Though the world was at peace, Gohan wasn't. Almost every night in his dreams, he was right back in the fight with the androids. Helpless. He kept it to himself though, hoping it would pass, but as one year bled into another, he would find it hadn't stopped. The androids, Super 13, Cell, he'd see all of them in his dreams. No matter how much stronger he became, physically, mentally, he was still trapped. He almost never slept properly, but he did his best to hide it. He assured people it was nothing whenever anyone asked if he was okay. Pan never really questioned why her dad always seemed to have significantly less energy than her mom. To her, it was just normal. Still, despite these dreams, or perhaps because of them, Gohan would train with Trunks, Videl, and 16 pretty often. Even Pan got involved. She was far more eager to join in than he had been when he was a kid, and she was much stronger than he was when he was young. Honestly, she might even give Frieza a run for his money. She was full of potential. Speaking of potential, neither Gohan or Trunks managed to attain Super Saiyan 2. They couldn't explain why, but somehow it just evaded them. They still grew stronger, but not enough for them to feel confident. And that's where it's going to stop for now. The androids might be gone, but that doesn't mean it's over. Not by a long shot. Where do you think this story's going to go from here? Leave a comment and let me know what you think, or just say hi. Really, anything's fine. Maybe consider liking or subscribing if you want to, but that's totally up to you. Anyway, that's all from me. Take care.